Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here with Dario Nardi, and we're here to discuss the wisdom of the six function. And so if you love the 8 function model, you will love today's episode. And so if you're new to the 8 function model, hello there. And so when it comes to the six function, it can actually be quite strong in many of the types, depending on a person's environment. And so we can either embrace or reject it. And I find some people can actually be quite good at their six function. Let's say some of the ENFPs I know can have really good extroverted feeling. And for some ENFPs, it's a little less developed. And so we're here today to discuss what is the six function and the evidence behind it. But before we do that, I'd like to just let everyone know about an event that Dario's holding from October 20th to 26th. And so it's going to be a series of workshops. So you can attend either one or the whole week. And I will be there as well. And Dario will be doing brain scans as well. So if you've been really wanting that done, I mean, he's your man. If you want to be in an event where you get to explore Jung's ideas on human connection, active imagination, then this is the weekend for you. I'll have more links down below. And so I'm curious, Dario, if you can let us know a bit about the six function and your thoughts behind that.
Yeah. So one thing I'd like to say right from the start is these numbers like 1st through 8. And John Beebe, Dr. John Beebe, Jungian psychiatrist, has spoken about this and quite a bit on the role of each of the functions in our personality. And he said that the numbering system is purely for having a common reference or for convenience, and it has nothing to do with the strength of it in our, or the sort of like just as a raw number strength or development in our personality. And there is, in fact, a lot of evidence from empirical evidence, statistical evidence by different people, which we'll get to, that says that the sixth function is as well developed and used as, of course, not the dominant function, but in the same area as the second and third functions. So we really should think of each person as having a dominant and then a pool of second, third, and sixth. And then down there, we'll see, what they develop from there. I'd like to use Star Wars as an example, where there's the character, the hero or heroine encounters this dark parent figure, which Beebe calls a senex or witch. There are 2 different meanings. Just senex is masculine and the witch is feminine in their wordage. And I think Star Wars is a great example where at the beginning, or towards the beginning in the first movie, he has this very kindly father figure, Obi-Wan Kenobi, that he loses. And later on, he encounters, not too far later, but he has to deal with personally, is facing a dangerous father figure, a senex, who is Darth Vader. Someone might think at the beginning that Darth Vader is the sort of demonic role, but that's not true. That's the Emperor. And so usually this dark figure is someone who's unmasked, and there's a redemptive process that they can go through so that both parties learn a lesson and they gain wisdom in the process. And so this is why I personally call the sixth function the doorway to wisdom. And it's our choice, as you mentioned, like whether to walk through it or not. And I think that it's something when interviewing people or just looking at the data for younger people, that it tends to be less developed. And then we have an opportunity in usually early adulthood, but certainly opportunities come up later. Like, are we going to keep facing this or experiencing our sixth function as this dark, stern obstacle, or as a defense mechanism that just pops up? Or can we use it to, or discover how to allow it to come out, to express itself, to enrich our lives? My personal example is that in university, I really, I learned about type in university, and I had INTP professors in engineering. That was inevitable. And I find them so incredibly irritating. They would articulate some broad concept, make some statement, and they would go like halfway through one example, just halfway, and then they would ask a bunch of questions or sort of assume now I can do problem solving around the principle. And I'm just like, where are your other examples? Because my extroverted thinking and even my inferior extroverted sensing like wants some examples. But it was later in graduate school, and I think that's an environment that really encourages TI. We'll get to that when we talk about istj and intj. And so I had like dissertation advisors, and Linda Barron's working with her for many years, introverted thinking exposure. And now I'm like, wow, introverted thinking is amazing because I can walk into like any situation that I have like an overarching principle that covers that situation and just like derive what I need to say or do in that situation. So when people ask me something, they bring up some like random topic. And immediately I'm going to think like sort of, okay, which box of principles does this go? Oh, it goes into ethical principles about type. So let's discuss, and then I'll have an answer that immediately pops out about ethical principles. And this isn't an FI version of ethical principles. It's an abstraction that applies to everybody and is just something that is really, in this case, Linda Barron's and David Kiersey and so on have really worked out. There are many other principles in economics and business, in relationships, in working out and health. I mean, just having these like core broad principles is super powerful. Having a basic principles about life, really, really powerful. Do I use it all the time for problem solving? No, but it's not like my preferred functions. But it was a wonderful thing to discover and sort of get drummed into me to embrace it. So that's what I hope with people today, that they hear about this. I'm going to try and give some ideas of how you know when it's developed or not. And then what does it look like when you embrace your sixth function? And then we'll talk about data a little bit too.
Absolutely. It's good that you brought up how the 8-function model is not quantitative, because I feel like a lot of people go into it thinking that it is. It's like a hierarchy of strength. They see it from 1 to 8, whereas it's actually, like you said, John Beebe calls it qualitative. So they're actually meant to symbolize archetypes rather than function strength. And so, yeah, the 6th function can be really strong in some people. And so it can really create type confusion. Like sometimes people wonder, how can you get an INFP and INFJ confused? But it's actually the most common mistypes are between people wondering if they're the J or P version of a type. And when you're thinking about the 4-function model, that seems ridiculous because you're like, they have completely opposite functions. How can they get confused for one another? Yet there's so many people in the community who struggle with knowing their type, even when they know the functions. And they're between those two types, and it's because of the 6th function. So if you have an INFP with strong NI or an INFJ with strong FI, it can become a little harder to figure out their type. It helps bring some clarity to why people go through some type conundrums. And it's actually backed up by a lot of research too. So Dario Nardi, you created a really popular personality instrument called Keys to Cognition, and you've collected a lot of data. Is it like around 500,000? Like
Yeah.
how many people have taken it, I guess?
At this point, I don't know, but when we started analyzing it, I guess in 2018 or 19, there were over 500,000 entries. Now, of course, there's a method of cleaning the data that looks for redundancies and that kind of thing. So when Dr. Mina Barmani, who is a therapist and a professor at Johns Hopkins, when she and some of her colleagues analyzed all of that data, they reduced it down to a set of about 130,000 people. And really found not only some really strong, clear statistical patterns which support Jung, not necessarily the Myers-Briggs instrument model, but Jung. And it fit really well with her prior research that she did on, which is published, is her dissertation for Mark Majors, who's a statistician, a psychometric statistician, and his the Majors PTI, which is really popular if you're listening from Australia or Canada or something. The Majors PTI is used more than the MBTI there. She found the same patterns. And then Steve Myers, in his development of the MTRI, so Steve Myers is based in the UK, And the MTRI was about team roles and organizations, but it is 8 functions. He also found the exact same patterns that Mina and I have found. So that really gives a lot, and these are all like statistical instruments that were developed. So working off of a lot of material, from tens of thousands to several 100,000 people, and really seeing this again and again. Mina calls this the tricycle model, which is essentially that the front wheel of a tricycle is the dominant function, and that's what you're steering with, and it's the front seat driver, so to speak. So it's a little bit like the personality hacker car model, except it's a tricycle, to keep it simple. And then the back wheels are actually the second function and the sixth function. And the back wheels are not as important, but it is useful to have 2 of them. And of course, the third function also plays a strong role in the data, but it really is the second and the sixth. And the way I like to imagine it is there's 4 buildings, again, in a skyline or on a block. And the buildings, let's say, are called sensing, intuiting, thinking, feeling for a person, or not in that order. So for INFJ, they would be intuiting, feeling, thinking, and sensing. Each one of those buildings casts a shadow. It doesn't cast a shadow all day long. It doesn't cast a shadow at night. It doesn't cast a shadow at noon, but it casts a shadow for a good part of daylight. And that shadow is actually the shadow function. So the shadow functions don't go from 1 to 8. They're more like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there's the egosyntonic, as BB calls it, and then the dystonic or shadow version of that type. And so that's the second function is actually quite strong for potentially. I think it's a choice. I think it depends on environment, and a person has a choice also to reject it.
That's a great way of putting it. And I think this sheds such a light on why people get the scores they do on cognitive function assessments. And so I have clients coming in, let's say it's someone who knows they have INTP preferences. They're like, Joyce, I'm sure I'm an INTP, but when I take keys to cognition, I get TI, NE, and NI as my top scores on that instrument. And I have to reassure them. And I'm like, this is normal. A lot of people actually score really high on the 6th function on these kind of surveys. And there's a lot of evidence to back it up. Like your assessment has those kind of results. And a lot of the other people who gauge cognitive functions also get the same results too. And so, yeah, it seems like the 6th function really does have an impact. And so that brings us to looking at how actual types experience this. And so I'm thinking we can start with the EP types. And so let's go over ENTP and ESTP, where their 6th function is extroverted thinking, how this shows up in them when they embrace it, and how it looks like when they reject it, and all your thoughts on this topic too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a great place to start with ESTP and ENTP. This is extroverted thinking, which I call out as something that's it's building something in a timely way. So measuring and constructing for progress, and it's in its basic use. It's following steps, points, and timetables. Now, you might think right away, well, but in school, like even as early as 5 years old, 6 years old, people need to develop that kind of thing to get through school. And this is where an example of culture and socialization matter. It's not even just a matter of the family. It's like built into the culture to develop these things. Now, the ETP might really find it irritating, like a waste of time or something like that. But on the other hand, they're also feeling like, well, wouldn't it be nice to be more organized in some way? They may feel torn when they're young because it's like they're getting all this outside structure, these time constraints, that their ideas need to be validated by evidence, that there's like standard metrics that you're supposed to use or institutional criteria and data. And they really sort of rebel against these things. The dominant function is like, why are we wasting time with this? But eventually they can incorporate it in a useful way. And I would think of my aunt as an example, ENTP preferences, and she has to get through a lot of work and have a lot of things organized every day, which she's been doing for many years. She's a boomer. She has like loves to travel, as many ENTPs do, and found that being a travel agent was a great excuse to make money while traveling at the same time. And she's not just a standard, like, sit on the phone and fill out, like a flight or something. That's not what she does. She does more sophisticated kinds of things. But she developed her own system of processing people and getting them sort of what they need, and adapting herself to the particular tool that is used for travel agents. And really has like a very streamlined process that she developed, as well as having a regular schedule every day. Now, some of that could be also introverted sensing, fair enough. And she needs to talk to people on the phone or email or whatever. There's this like extroverted feeling that needs to happen too. She has introverted thinking in terms of her principles. So like she developed a model, and I'm not going to go in detail about all of the types this way, but I think this is a good example. She has a model of traveler types that she developed herself. And so she's using like a mental model in the background of like, gee, is this really a good like itinerary for this kind of client based on the type of traveler that they are? Nonetheless, she has to conform herself to these external standards, and she found a way to do that. And I feel a lot of times, whenever we develop the sixth function, we have to find our own way of doing it. And it needs to get approval from the dominant function, and even maybe the auxiliary function. So that's why it's going to take some time to develop. Similarly, for an ESTP, that the ESTP is going to be like, oh, right, there are measures of success. And a sort of weak answer that I think is easy for any ESTP is to say, well, like, how much money does it make? Like, what is the impact on the bottom line? Because that's also is the word, because remember, it has to get permission from the dominant function. It is also a very tangible, practical, material thing. Money made. You spend the money, you have tangible goods, like it's a thing in your bank account. But they do more than the analysis, and a lot of ESTPs actually can handle quite analytical jobs. And they're very quick at it. But when they bring in that extroverted thinking, then there really are these sort of measures of success that are there, which hopefully get more sophisticated and are more open to like, yeah, just like, and it helps that extroverted sensing and extroverted thinking are both, they both buy into facts, different kinds of facts, but they both buy into facts. But eventually, in the extroverted thinking, which is also comfortable with intangible facts, that they can do that too. So those are those two types. And I think one way we can know whether a person has developed it or not, of course, there is this element in school. Like, I think what happens is they learn the basic use, they do it because they have to, and they don't like it. And very much for these two types, it's really a process of, if you ask them about something practical in their lives, what is your system for doing it? Do they have a system? Can they answer that question? And you don't need to explain it to you. It's like, can they even answer the question? What is the system that you developed to handle it? And if they can tell you, then that means that they really have done a good job in developing that. Does that mean that they suddenly all going to do reasoning by measures and evidence, like all of that? Not necessarily. They're probably going to hire people to do the more like implementing of building something. And I would add finally that that remember that each of the functions comes in a more yin or yang, like feminine or masculine form. So there's going to be one version, the manager, that's much more short term, which is why ESTP could look like ESTJ, for example. And then there's this more builder type that's more like, are all of the details accurate? Is it effective in its details? That's a little bit more of a builder. And that then will not be as obvious to people, but it's still there in the personality as the system that they've developed.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the six function TE can also show up in ENTPs and ESTPs when they notice that someone doesn't use TE that well, and they're like, come on, that person, we actually need to do this thing. Let's say there's a last minute thing that has to get done, then the TE really pops in that they know how to prioritize and order their resources. And they're
Yeah,
looking around at this person who's totally not working with their resources in the best way possible. And it's like, I've left this till the last minute already. I need you to actually get your butt in order.
Yeah. It's so I love what you've said there, because there is this element that's like, because they view maturing, like they've walked through that door of wisdom as developing a streamlined system to get things done efficiently and effectively. When they encounter people who haven't done that, especially when they know society expects that, they're like, why have you not done that? And if you don't have that, then absolutely their estimation of the person is going to be less than.
Absolutely, yeah. For example, an ENTP is gonna have many contingency plans built in because 'cause they're thinking about all the possibilities, and in some way, when they implement it, it is very streamlined, and they're really getting that thing done, and so they consider that their plan. So, like, it's a blob of plan.
Yeah, a blah blah plan is absolutely. So I know an ENTP who has done martial arts for many years, and he actually can draw out a tree diagram of moves to make in particular situations, like the martial arts moves. Um, as a TE user, I don't need to do that because I have that in my. Assuming I've memorized that, and keeping in mind ENTP also has some introverted sensing, but it really and it isn't a logical model. I mean, he'll say it's logical, but in the TI sense, it's just like this is what works. That you need to do these things in this order in order for make it happen. And he literally draws out on a piece of paper to help him think it through and like memorize it and use it.
It's like you said, the dominant and the auxiliary function have to approve of it for the 6 function to do its thing. So the NENTI for the ENTP is like, "Yes, do it," and then they can TE very well. So very well put, Dario. And so that brings us to the ENFP and ESFP. How do they experience their 6 function of extroverted feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I define FE as nurture trust in giving relationships. So there is automatically this assumption there's other people and we're in relationship with each other. There's an us. And extroverted feeling is a function that's very common in society. I mean, along with extroverted thinking. However, it's not necessarily something that is, quote, taught or rewarded tangibly in an immediate way, say in school or in the workplace. I think in the workplace now, people get like guidelines around FE behavior, like what you're supposed to do, but that isn't the same as like, yeah, you just need to be able to like follow a schedule and a timetable and charts and diagrams and that kind of thing. I think it ends up depending a bit on the person's social environment. Like, did they have a lot of FE people in their family, FJ types, or did they have a mentor or like really best friend or something like that like really encouraged them to do it? That said, the opportunities for that are plentiful. And I think there's also a gender element that comes into it, that generally speaking, women are more expected to do FE than men are. So female ESFP or ENFP is going to get a lot of opportunities and examples. They might be really put off by those examples because their FI is like, wow, this is really fake, these interactions. Oh, we're just supposed to like all wear the same clothes and go to the same events and talk in the same way, and there's no space for disagreement. At times, the ENFP will use extroverted intuiting to try and fake their way through the FE. Yeah, we'll just like, I'm just going to sort of have a story to model through in order to get through the situation. For ESFPs tend to interact a lot with people. They have the certain vivaciousness that's there usually, and especially for female ESFP. But again, it could be just their family environment. They're going to do it to some extent. And in fact, I have a story. Somebody I know, ESFP, who's now older in his 60s. And he described how as a young adult, because of family environment, he was actually really, really pushed to do extroverted feeling. And when he first encountered type, he really thought, well, this is weird. Like, am I ESFJ? Looking at it initially. And then it was only in the relief of seeing his family and knowing his own history, because he didn't discover type when he was younger. He was a little bit older. He's like, yeah, it was a journey to discover and like get in touch with my own introverted feeling and then actually really get anchored in that. Because he's like, there were all these expectations of how I'm supposed to behave, what kind of masks I'm supposed to put on. So there is that. I think it's very common in society, but whether or not the person develops a little bit more contingent. And again, there are two versions of it. So there's this shepherd sort of strong FE version that like corrals everybody to get along in the group and to share the same sort of, I want to say, like politeness and language that they use. You know, is it a he, him, or a she, her? Like we're going to put that on our thing because everybody's doing it and it's important and valuable. So they're going to. And FI is like, I don't know, like, why are you doing that? Or like, why are you imposing yourself on me? So there is always that balancing act that has to happen, especially when surrounded by strong FE, the Yang FE. But the more receptive host version is one that usually is like a nice doorway. That ESFP and ENFP are like, oh, hosting people. And like, oh, we're inviting these different people and who's going to get along with whom and where should they sit and what is it that they like and don't like, and paying attention to that and accommodating people from where they are. And I think that's a nice doorway for them to get in on the FE action. And I think it comes up in other ways too, like a really sort of the advanced version of FE is this like, not just empathy, but compassion. And I want to emphasize, I don't put that as part of the standard definition of extroverted feeling. I think all human beings have capacity for empathy, and all human beings, like compassion, is something to really develop or cultivate. And I've met FJ types who actually don't have compassion. I mean, they put on a show of having it with the right words, but they don't actually have compassion. They may not even have empathy. So there is this. They care because they're supposed to. So there is this authenticity sort of thing where the ENFP or ESFP is like, okay, I can do FE, and it's not about the system I've developed, like we talked about with TE and the other types. For FE, it's like, who is my circle of friends? Who are the people that I interact with? I'm only going to interact with people that I actually want to use this FE with. And if I am forced, am I pushed into situations, yeah, maybe I'm going to do it for a short time, but those people are not going to be my friends. So the FI has to be satisfied that these are people I want to be with, that we share like an actual like pathos. And then the FE can really come out and has that freedom to shine. I would say it also comes up in things like commitment, like getting married, and what does that mean in a sort of not just an SI way, but an FE way. So it's that freedom to choose the relationship commitments that gives them the permission to do like the social, like standard kind of stuff that comes with FE.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of ENFPs and ESFPs can look like golden retrievers. So they have a playfulness to them and a warmth. They might be huggers for some of them. And so they can look like ESFJs or ENFJs at times with the level of social engagement that they can do. And sometimes they can be attuned to other people's feelings as well. So that's also another element of extroverted feeling. And so, yeah, their FE can be really good until it steps on an FI value. So if it goes against what an ENFP or ESFP believes in, immediately within split seconds, they will stand up for their cause. But other than that, FE can actually be surprisingly strong in these types. I guess it's also the optimism they have can also add to this almost FE-like flavor, where it can seem like inclusive, like it's a sense of upbeatness or upliftingness where they go. It's also a part of their get things going interaction style, but it can look like extroverted feeling at times.
Yeah. In the test, there is how they respond to words like us and our, and whether they're okay with things like our values and our way of doing things and our circle of friends. The ENFP or ESFP is like, there's you and me, but there's no us. Like that's a weird, like that's a very, very high bar for them to say or respond positively to we us kind of language.
Yeah, leading with an extroverted perceiving function and an introverted judging function the FI wants a sense of autonomy and their own self-expression, and they don't want that individuality to be squashed in this group action. So you'll see the level of themselvesness still in ENFPs and ESFPs that can sometimes look like the stubbornness of their own individual perspective. But yeah, it's like this freedom that they won't give up. There's a sovereignty that they need to keep. And so
Mhm.
let's go on to the EJ types. And so when it comes to the ENJs that have extroverted intuition in their sixth function, I'm wondering about your
Mhm.
thoughts on that. Society supports their functions, so they may not have to use their sixth function that much for a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So for ENTJ and ENFJ, when it comes to developing NE, I think that is a little bit of a challenge because their dominant function is already so prevalent and supported in society, as well as their third function, extroverted sensing, is fairly common and is, even if it's not used a lot in a workplace or something, is still sort of like idealized or lionized in like media and that kind of thing. Um, and so do they have the opportunity or the push from the outside to develop it? I think that really depends more upon like, do they have friends who are like relationships that are really push them in the direction of using extroverted intuiting. So how do I define NE? Exploring emerging patterns, and is just noticing abstract patterns as they emerge and being able to shift with those as things come up. And the sort of the test that I use with, does the person have well developed NE or not, for both ENTJ and ENFJ. One is, are they curious? And I don't mean curious to fulfill an agenda. So, like, do they ask questions? I remember encountering a younger ENFJ who had like I think like NI mystical experience. And one of the things is I'm listening that came out of as he's talking about is like, for some reason, he decided that that was a big reason to not use NE. That he prided himself that he no longer asked people questions. I'm like, why would you not ask questions? Like that's the I mean, like maybe I understand asking questions to fulfill like, oh, we need to finish this task, or sometimes with the ENFJ, it's also like I'm trying to do something. I'm trying to get something out of the relationship. Let me ask some questions to figure that out. So I don't mean that. I mean the kind of curiosity that's there that's very open ended from NE. So yeah, it could be like, okay, I'm sitting in an office place. Like, how much am I willing to do brainstorming? And if there's a container around the brainstorming, like it starts at 1 o'clock and ends at 2 o'clock, and there's an agenda around it and so on. It's like, okay, we're generating ideas, and then I can do something. I can sift through those ideas and figure them out, or like put some stuff together that will meet our vision and is actionable. No, but NE is more like I'm asking questions because I'm curious. And oftentimes, an ENFP or ENTP ask questions in a way, especially ENFP, that doesn't serve any agenda in the moment, or even an agenda that they have underneath. Like they don't even have an agenda. Is just like, oh, like how will the person respond? I mean, yeah, sometimes the ENFP or ENTP is like running an experiment in a sense in their head, like, ooh, how will this person respond to this? They said they believed this, but if I ask this question, how do they actually reply? Like there's that kind of curiosity that they'll show. But many times this is just like, yeah, I'm asking questions because I'm interested. And then for the ENTJ or ENFJ, how much are they willing to shift as the conversation or interaction goes along? Or do they have a very set idea of what we're supposed to do in this situation? Or they have a very set vision, and the brainstorming session, if it doesn't meet the vision, then they're like not going to be open to it. So it really is something that, like I said, is socially contingent, and it's not to say something bad about these two types, but I don't think that they have a lot of push from the outside many times, or good role models to make it happen. And just Some examples with it. So NE, for example, likes covert communication, like indirect ways of saying things or suggestions, like through humor, telling a story, and then people reflect on that later. And they don't like that. ENTJ and ENFJ like purposeful, overt communication. Imagination is great when it's part of a vision or a practice, like we're visualizing in our meditation how to do something. But just like random use of imagination, it just feels like baloney raining from the sky. So they're not going to do that. Endless what ifs. They're not going to do that. And then when they do get more into it, when they find a way to do extroverted intuiting, and they accept it, into their lives, then their imagination opens up a lot more. So, for example, if they take on a project, and I think this is really good, I really suggest this for any ENJ type, do something like writing fiction and challenge yourself to write fiction that is not illustrating how people are supposed to act or like what they're supposed to do in order to meet some goal or some value, but like from the what's the story and where does it carry them, and allow your imagination to come out. And I know they have it in them. And I know that, then the NI can also get on board. And the NI is like, yeah, you're right. Like we can do more than just envisioning for this project. Like INFJ or INTJ totally accept that there's the whole space of NI that's just like, yeah, we come up with stuff for no reason at all. Just like it's like our imagination just gets really active, and it isn't necessarily with other people, but it gets really active. So that's a great like little on-ramp to that. Using jokes and anecdotes as a way to diffuse tension, finding indirect ways of saying things before broaching a problem, being softer, more diplomatic, really stopping and asking what are the other people's viewpoints. And so NI, again, coming on board with this and saying, yes, you have my permission. ENFJ is like, oh yeah, there's a difficult problem between people. Maybe there's a way where I can like see everyone's point of view and then do some brainstorming mentally around that in order to find a solution. So that it's going to be the Enneagram, it fits with the rest of the pattern of the personality. Semi-structured group roundtable session to generate fresh ideas. They may not be in the mood for that at all, but if they can be in the mood for that sometimes, then I think that would be really good.
I could totally see that. And I find the six function extroverted intuition shows itself in the ENFJ and ENTJ in the form of them playing or being good at Dungeons and Dragons or role playing, and they start to bring that side out of them. And I noticed that they also sometimes have a Hermes energy to them, so a mischievousness to them. And so, like, let's say they just kind of like to mess with people. That extroverted intuition is known for its experimentation. And so I know ENTJs who like trolling people or saying something that is kind of mischievous and pushes the envelope in a way. So these are qualities that can build over time if they see that the NE enhances their goal in life. Let's say an ENTJ is like, I have a vision for my life where I create the best quality of life in the top 99 percentile of people. And how do I do that? By having a fun life. And how do I have a fun life? And then the extroverted intuition gets incorporated because it's a part of their equation for the highest quality of life. And so they can justify that extroverted intuition. So
That brings up a whole bunch of thoughts, which I'll try and say briefly. So one is that when the sixth function is not so well integrated and it erupts as a defense mechanism, or as I would say like a proactive defense, an attack in a sense. Like I'm going to stab you from the side unexpectedly. And that's a way that it's often described as coming out. So it can come out as like a barb or something like that, which is it's the witch casting her spell in a sense that is making that happen. And so that's one thing that comes up. The other, I love how you talk about like the equation, and for ENTJ, if any fits into the equation, then they're really much more willing to entertain it. And then NE becomes another resource along with SE and NI, so that the three of them together are all different ways to interact with the environment. And there's a level, I have to say, if a person wants to, and this is sort of funny, and I don't mean this as a completely class thing, but it is like an upper class kind of thing or a sophistication kind of thing. NE, especially like a polished version of NE, is a really nice sign that the person is classy. In the sense, like, it doesn't matter their actual socioeconomic class, but they're classy. That they tell the right joke at the right time, not because they've rehearsed it, but because they have a sense of the dynamics of the situation and what is just so smooth and makes people laugh and like breaks a negative energy cycle that's there. If an ENFJ or ENTJ finds that extroverted intuiting is a way to be more classy in life, then that's like, it's adding this like polish to everything that they do, instead of being very forceful as EJs can be.
Well said. And that brings us to the ESFJ and the ESTJ. And so I'm wondering about your thoughts on their sixth function, extroverted sensing.
Sure. So for ESTJ and ENFJ, this sixth function, extroverted sensing, I talk about it being immersing in the present context. So whatever is here and now is what we're doing. So a dinner party is where you discuss dinner party things, and a workplace is where you discuss work things. And there's, of course, with extroverted sensing, there's this element of playfulness, of sensuality, of pleasure. It's not about comfort, it's about pleasure. There's a risk-taking element that comes along with it. It can be sort of like, I'm going to say like gross or immediate in the kind of things, like gross sensual pleasures is like a concept, very different from something that's cultivated, like the kinds of wines that are available and appreciating those. So I think for ESTJ and ESFJ, when they see that extroverted sensing, bringing it into their life, raises the quality of their standards, their SI standards, then that can be really nice. Otherwise, they can get very locked into their SI standards and just whatever there is and just repeating those. Of course, extroverted sensing is fairly common in society. For all of the SP types who are out there, they're demonstrating that every day. So I think what happens with these two types is that they notice extroverted sensing a lot, and they usually don't act on it. So for example, in high school, they notice that their friends are doing things that are sketchy or illegal or whatever it is, in the sense of like, yeah, you know, my friends, they were smoking and drinking and they're not drinking age yet. I mean, maybe this was more relevant when I was growing up, but like they're having premarital sex. They're aware of these things going on, but they're like, but you don't need to actually show that, and I'm certainly not going to get involved with it, because they have these like very set standards, or maybe they do get briefly involved, but because it's their sixth function, they're like, well, that was a dumb idea, or it did nothing for me. So they push it away. But they do get this exposure, and I think that they can bring it in over time. And when they do, it can look very nice. It's about letting go. It's about trusting your instincts. So like in sports, for example, it's one thing for the ESTJ, say, football player to be like executing moves and a strategy. But where does their instinct come in? What if in this moment, and I just went to a USC football game a few days ago, which was very exciting. The pomp and circumstance of all the pomp is just over the top with the horses and fireworks. And that's University of Southern California, by the way, not South Carolina. Nothing against South Carolina, but just saying. It's one thing to follow the plan, but you know, as they say in warfare, it's like, when does the plan end? When the action begins. And so the person, are they able to adapt in the moment to the facts on the ground, even if those facts don't conform to anything that they had planned for? And So that capacity to have like this gut feel that I know I plan to pass the ball this way, but maybe I should throw it that way because this is the sudden opening that I wasn't expecting, because they don't know what the other team is going to do. And that can easily surprise them. And so it's that ability to like learn how to trust their instincts and to let go in the moment. I would say the other way it comes up is that ability to take actions that break their habits, because they can get into these habits, and because they tend to be like strong types. They're like, well, I know that like my current like work is not allowing me to go work out at the gym or eat healthy or whatever, but this is working for me and I don't have time and I have other responsibilities as a parent and this and that. I'm just like, yeah, you need to step outside of your habits because they're going to kill you. And it's usually a tangible extroverted sensing habit that they need to change. The food that they eat, the exercise regimen that they do, whatever it is. Not to mention the stuff like, yeah, we're on vacation, like, let's step outside of the planned stuff and do something different, because the opportunity presents itself. And I think that that's really nice. I think it helps the most, though, because the two types are very affiliative. The temperament affiliation, that ESTJ and ESFJ are very concerned with what other people are doing and what the group is doing. And so let's say ESFJ teacher is like, oh, these children need to learn to sit still. And the children are like 6 years old. I'm sorry, but kids that age are not wired to be sitting still all day. And I don't care what you think is appropriate. Like, your SI standard is wrong. Like that, that's just, I'm not saying that they don't need to learn that, but you need to make accommodations for other people's needs, like recess. It just kills me when a school is like, yeah, we can just get rid of like physical education and recess time, or we can minimize those in order to fit in more test taking skills or whatever it is. I'm like, no. People need like free extroverted sensing time on the playground or in nature, including, by the way, risk taking. You know, this is something that really, like the kids, it used to be when I was growing up, and it's still the same in other countries I've lived in, like in Norway. The kids go on bicycles even in the snow, and they go to school on their own, and they're even at school. Like, I remember this elementary school in outside Copenhagen. They have a huge climbing gym, and by climbing gym, I mean like a small mountain. It's like 80 feet high. And there's like kids who are like 8 years old with an instructor, but 8 years old just like climbing on the school property. That would never be in America, because, oh my God, we could get sued, or a child could fall, or a child could even just say that something bad happened, and then that creates a problem. So there's this risk aversion, especially in the United States, super, super high in every institution. SE is just like, that's just like normal human behavior. Like, okay, you went on a field trip in a canoeing and a child fell in the water. Like, they're mostly fine. They'll be fine by next week. Like, and, you know, in most other countries in the world, that's not a time to do a lawsuit. That's just like, yeah, that happens. Like, that's part of the human experience. Like, we're in nature. An animal might scratch you or bite you. Like, animals do that. I think the ability for the ESFJ or ESTJ to actually come to terms with reality, like the actual risks associated with being a human being in a physical world, and not like overregulating everything, that is just, then that says, yeah, they really have brought like extroverted sensing wisdom into their lives.
Agreed. And I also find some ESFJs and ESTJs can be avid worker outers. And so their SI sees that this is a very reasonable thing to do, that it'll make their lives more reliable, sustainable, and healthy in the long run in a very verifiable and proven way. And so they're very into it. It's also the part of them that eventually starts to have experiences. It's like, hey, I want to be a fun person too. I'm going to go out, do things.
Yeah, and some of that is extroverted intuiting, and that's fine too. I remember but for the extroverted sensing, my grandmother, who has ESTJ preferences, before she got married, but as a young adult, she really wanted to be a stage singer, and she had a decent voice and really enjoyed it. And it was very much the way she described it. Of course, she learned all the songs and she liked the classic songs. So the SI was being very well met. But she also didn't mind going to a nightclub and even singing in front of a really rowdy crowd. And her father said, no, like you can't do that. And one day she just decided to get on a bus and go into town and do it anyway. And unfortunately, she didn't pursue that in life. But it's not that act was just, yes, she did something that was like risky, and was some extroverted intuiting and some extroverted sensing. But the point is that it was a new experience, and actually doing something physical that was different. And also physical, I mean, singing, acting, performing is a very physical expression kind of thing. And so it's even being aware that it's like, oh yeah, it's like that's, and the person learns so much from it. Even doing it a few times, like, really had a big impact on her.
Well said. And so this brings us to the IP types. And so I'm wondering about the INTP and the INFP and their experience with sixth slot introverted intuition and your thoughts there.
Yeah. So as you mentioned at the beginning, I think especially for INFP, that frequently they have some introverted intuiting in them, particularly the more yin version of introverted intuiting, the oracle, this reception to like sort of random imagination and channeling dialogues with stuffed animals and pets, and not in the maybe serious way that an INFJ would, but it's still there. And as they get older in life, there's the opportunity to do that. I even remember one of my dissertation advisors' INTP preferences, and unlike many INTPs, he was actually very passionate about what he did, which was basically applied mathematics. And you would think like, well, but how would he get like, really, you're going to get passionate about math? Like, well, what does that mean? Well, in what he saw, because his specialty area was like fuzzy math, fuzzy set theory, and so on, is he's like, there are so many applications for this, and he could see the impact that it had. And it's like when people adopt a different way of doing math that disposes of a lot of assumptions, like everything needs to add up to 100%. He's like, no, it doesn't. Then there really was this vision that he had when he was teaching, and for the world, even when he would talk about it, that he's like, for devices, for example, whether it's your dishwasher or a clothes machine, or it's a construction device or whatever it is, that it can operate in a more efficient and effective way, that it can help reduce energy costs, all of these things. And no, he was not INTJ, he was very INTP-ish, but in the sense that there was this vision of how the world could be, and that actually drove the things that were his publications and encouraged him to not do theoretical math, but applied math. And I thought that was like, it's like, wow, we actually can, like, I understand him as a teacher. I actually enjoy sitting in class with him because there's like a vision for what to do with this. And of course, it also fit with his introverted thinking and extroverted intuiting. Like we're like bypassing standard assumptions that people have, like things need to add up to 100%. There's a whole mathematics, like there are basic principles involved. Even his extroverted feeling was being honored, because it's like we can help the world. We can help people in the earth. Like, this is a very nice thing. I don't think he ever said helping the earth, but that was, it's implied. It's like helping people. And so I really think, how do we know when INTP or INFP has introverted intuiting in their lives? It's more than just like having a meta perspective or aha insights and realizations, because anybody can have an aha insight at some points. Is about having like energy, purpose, and direction, and being open to an answer, not just an answer that you weren't expecting, but an answer that comes from a place that you might not normally approve of. So it's the INTP who has a mystical experience, and they're like, oh, maybe my model about life, the universe, and everything needs some revision. And if they engage in that process, then the NI is a bit like weaseled in and be like, yeah, there's more to the world than what the model has. For INFP and INTP, I think also is just you can look like, does their life have energy and direction in it? Like, I don't mean the INFP who's on a mission that's detached from, I don't want to say from reality, but for like everyday, like practical stuff. Because NI is still going to be concerned with some SE things and informed by that. But are they willing to engage in things, and those things bring an aha moment to them? They can say something like, I know an INFP, and it's like starting her own business. And it's not just because, having like doing this with people is valuable. It's like she has a vision. Like, you ask her, what is your vision? She can tell you what her vision is. And she's not the INFJ because she doesn't have visions about anything else in life. It's like this thing. And I feel like that's another little test about the sixth function versus, say, the first or second function is, what is the scope? And for INFP, oftentimes I find they do some NI for whatever reason, even though NI is not encouraged in society at all. But the scope of it is quite small. It's not everywhere all of the time, driving deeply these different aspects of their life. It's like playful, because it has to fit with the NE part as well. And for INTP, when they have this drive and vision and direction, then, and this openness to being like, there's like, my model might be bad, like not bad. They're not going to say it that way. My model needs refinement. And I'm willing even to start from scratch and rethink things. Paradigm change. I think that whenever INFP or INTP is willing to be open to a new basic paradigm, then that's like, NI is like crept in and is like contributing to the show.
Absolutely. It makes me think of Isabel Briggs Myers. And so the creator of the Myers-Briggs actually had a vision, and I believe it was an ENFP and INFP, but the person with INFP preferences, her purpose for this was creating a world of more peaceful understanding with this personality instrument. It's like, wow, she really did have a vision, and it took decades to execute, and she was totally fine with it. And so that could potentially be an argument for NI sixth function. And it makes me think about these INTPs too, who have this vision for a unifying theory of Myers-Briggs. And so it's partially their TISI creating a detailed model of a personality theory, but it's also the NI because of that extreme degree of purpose and vision and life purpose from it, where they're building this thing and they know the weightiness of it, and so they stick with it. And it's like, wow, you'll see it play out sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that raises a really interesting topic. Jung himself and his colleagues who knew him at the time were pretty clear on the general direction of his type preferences, which were introversion and intuiting and thinking. And they didn't have JP language because Jung didn't think that way. And he wouldn't answer like that either, usually. So we know, so INTP or INTJ, and there are different arguments made for each. And I don't have a strong opinion, by the way, on it either way, because sometimes I read his stuff and I'm like, well, very INTP-ish, and then other times I'm like, I don't know, INTJ. There's also, a big cultural element because he was born in the middle of the Victorian era in the late 19th century and grew up in the late 19th century. So this is like 150 years ago. And just like that era in history and all of that was very different. But my point is like, he could very easily be an INTP with well-developed introverted intuiting. And that was something that, by the way, did not appear until later in his life, slowly, when he had this break with Freud, who was more of a colleague, not a mentor. Sometimes people say mentor, and that's not true. Jung was already established in his own right. But there, and then keeping in mind, like I mentioned before, the yin and yang version of each function. So when Jung talks about NI, he usually talks the yin version of NI. So it's about aesthetics and the shamanic practice and energy and the nature of the unconscious and opening up doorways to the unconscious. So with Jung, I mean, it's perfectly plausible that, to me, INTP with well-developed introverted intuiting, and that when we look at his work and what he focused on with introverted intuiting, the way he described it is a very yin version in the description. So what is the yin version of NI, what I call the oracle? And that is a concern with things like symbols, the unconscious, energy, dreams, the stuff that's more like shamanic or energetic in nature, different from the way that NI is usually talked about, which is visionary and having a vision of things and aha moments and insights and so on. I think that's for various reasons. One is that the yin version of NI is like the black sheep stepchild of all of American culture. Not necessarily true in other cultures. The other thing that's happened is that the yin and yang versions of NI have been very much assigned to INFJ and INTJ. That the INFJ does like the yin version and the INTJ does the yang version. I think that this assignment has been harmful and has also misled people. INFJs who think, well, maybe I'm INTJ, especially male INFJs, because they're doing the yang visionary version of NI. So when it comes to NI, some of it I think we need to ask is, like, for INTP and INFP, what version are they doing of NI? And if it was the case that Jung was INTP preferences, because he said he would start the thing definitely thinking preference, and that intuiting was something that, yes, he had, but he developed and discovered more and got into more as he got older, like broke away to found his own self as a person. And he said he was terrible with the feeling function and was often oblivious to his environment. So yeah, he had well-developed thinking function. It's also possible that, as I've seen with INTJs, that they have well-developed TI that's especially sort of like academic in nature, and that they write and talk and think in a way that's very abstract and conceptual and academic. And then that could also look like Jung. And then INTJ would have a yin version of NI instead of a yang version. I think we would need to investigate his life more. Like, what were his learning points? Because he read a lot, but he also had experiences. Like coming to America and going to Taos, New Mexico, and meeting the Native Americans there and spending time there. And that had a huge impact on his work for the rest of his life. And that was an extroverted sensing experience, going on a voyage, meeting new people, having experiences that changes his way of thinking. Like, he has aha light bulbs that go on, and then he goes back and that influences everything else he does. I mean, that could be any human being, but I think that when we acknowledge the sixth function, that we can then be open to more possibilities and also have more analytical tools to understand what we're researching.
Well said, well said. And so I'm wondering about ISFP and ISTP. How does their sixth function introverted sensing appear?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, these two types have tremendous opportunities to, and in fact, pressure usually to develop introverted sensing, because that is one of the most common functions in the population. They're surrounded by people, many times a parent or both parents, certainly in the school environment. They're going to be exposed regularly to introverted sensing. I think when they're younger, they really, really dislike it. Oh, there's a standardized way of learning things, really. Especially ISTP. Like, ISTP is so annoyed by this idea that somebody else is going to tell them how to learn and what to learn. Especially when that person who's telling them that seems clearly stupider than they are. So about whatever topic it is, because the person has no like hands-on knowledge. That's sort of where we get those who can't do teach. And so there is this big resistance to introverted sensing, but there's also this constant exposure to it all the time. And I think that they really can get a lot of benefit integrating it into their lives. Some of that is, things like memory and recollection and thinking about the past, and where it can show up in the negative way. Remember, we talked about, like, it can be defensive, the sixth function. or be like that Darth Vader figure, is when the ISTP or ISFP becomes trapped in past negative experiences. Like there's something negative that happened when they were 10 years old and they cannot shake it. No matter what they do, they just cannot shake it. Like it's this Darth Vader figure that's riding them. And so I would say to them, like, why develop SI? It's because like you need to come to terms with that. And what are the things that are going to help you come to terms with it? And it's usually by NI gives them insights, and then they need to make habits out of those. So for ISFP and ISTP, things like what we might call cognitive hygiene. So it's actually taking the time to develop good cognitive habits, like how do I talk to myself when they have some paranoid moment? And because that's what happens when you have intuiting as third or seventh function, is that the type has paranoid moments. And so what are the good like habits that can make sure they don't fall into those traps? And some of that is going to be introverted intuiting. Is like, how can I get on top of my own thinking process? And some of it is the actual habit building that needs to happen. And then there's, of course, the very practical part of SI, which is like, how do I hold down a job and feed a family and like have a routine that doesn't kill me? Like those are all really, really valuable things to have. So I would say for those types, it's like, give yourself variety every day, but also have some kind of daily routine or framework, some kind of foundation, having your own home, your own place of business where you can do what you want to, but at the same time, you have some kind of anchor that drags you down. It's not a ball and chain, but it's something healthy that anchors you, is like really, really valuable. And even if it's something like a degree, like getting a university degree, it's like, wow, imagine the opportunities that are opened up with this piece of paper. And imagine the opportunities, I mean, that's like you're asking a lot from them because you're asking them to go to their seventh function. So that's not a great way to say it. But what you have to really get at is what is their NI vision and their FI or TI values and principles. And then here are the habits to help make it happen. And the routine, the foundation to help make that happen. And in my experience, a lot of ISFPs and ISTPs do find that because there are enough examples and pressure in life to make it happen. Whether they're healthy routines in the long run, that's another story.
Yeah, absolutely. I also know an ISFP who doesn't like the idea of giving birth. So she's like, Joyce, I don't want to have children because of the pain that is in childbirth. And so to me, I'm like, oh, it almost sounds like SI discomfort. It's like you want to stay comfortable, so you don't want to do this thing that could like hurt you in any way. And so you're very like, I don't want that experience. And I also know ISTPs who will actually play video games on easier modes. And I'm like, I thought their SE would make them want challenge in these specific things. And it's like sometimes they can dip into that SI too, or they want the comfort of a easier mode in a video game, which is what was very surprising to me. And so,
Yeah.
all right, let's go to the ISTJ and INTJ types with introverted thinking in their sixth slot. What do you think there?
Yeah. So some of that I described at the beginning about my own experience. And with introverted thinking, what is it? It's this like gaining, way I call it is gaining leverage using a framework. So it's not just about analyzing, although ISTP and INTP, especially INTP, can do that a lot. It really is about like locating the leverage points, and that happens when you really understand what something is. And then you can, with the minimal effort, you can make a big change that happens. And this in TI in general, I think there's this really nice thing where ISTJ and INTJ, when they've gotten TI in their life, when they don't freeze in new situations. So, oh, this is a question. I've never been asked this before. And they're like, I don't know. Or it's a new kind of situation that they're going into, and they like freeze. And IJ types are known that they'll freeze. This is a great test. When the TI is working, all of a sudden they don't freeze. In fact, very fluidly in a lot of things is like, oh, wow, like you just did that, or you came up with that. Like, how were you able to do that? And it's because behind it, they have principles that they can fall back on. And I say fall back on because the principle is not like front and center in their mind, and they're not necessarily problem solving in it, like, or like trying to really like, oh yeah, where is the leverage in the situation, like consciously. But there is this like attitude or lifestyle that's like, yeah, if I have these principles, then all of a sudden I can solve a whole lot more problems practically, and life becomes much less stressful. And they're a lot more like dynamic. Also ask them, like, what are your core? So this is an interesting question. Like, what are your core principles? If an ISTJ or INTJ gives you the FI answers, that's fine. That's what they're normally going to start to do. But what are their impersonal answers? Not about their job topic, but what are their principles about life that are observations about the universe or whatever it is, that's not just them personally. And if you feel a lot of energy coming in around it, then it's like, okay, that's an FI thing, like emotion energy. But if they're just like, oh, here's this observation, and it's very presented in like a very personal, impersonal, confident way, then it's like, yeah, there's a lot of TI. Like TI has been given some room to like think about that and do something. And so being able to solve from core principles, to say what they are, is very, very nice, and to be able to respond in new situations that they didn't prepare for. I would say there's also really nice level of skepticism, because INTP and ISTP tend to be very skeptical types. And is this just skepticism about things that they don't like? So that's like child FI. Or is it a skepticism that's coming, it's from like a critical place that's like, well, the statistical analysis that you're doing is not the most effective approach, and you want to try this other approach instead. And it's a criticism, and it's not even necessarily based on, because people will mention things to me and I'm like, I've never worked in this area, but I can give them advice because I have this principles that says that, like, systems analysis, to assume, well, a human being is a dynamic system, a party is a dynamic system, this and that. So you want to apply dynamic systems principles rather than just statistical analysis or rule-based thinking. If you can, and then here are some ways that you can actually do that. And then when you adopt these system principles, then all of a sudden the thinking is a lot more rich and flexible. And that's just very, very empowering, I would say. Sometimes the critic is more Yang TI and is sort of exclusionary. And it's like, well, no, all this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and the person is very argumentative and whatever. And then that's like not really, that's sort of like immature Yang TI. Whereas the mature Yang TI is like asking some pinpoint questions, and like not as an aha moment or anything. It's like ISTJ, for example, being like, yeah, following this principle, like this is what you need to do, even though they haven't actually been in your situation before. I think higher education and competition, like in the workplace and in life, tend to encourage this function. So it's something that they're probably not going to develop, or even they probably dislike, as most people do when they're kids and teenagers. But I think that they're, especially if they do higher education or they're in a very competitive environment, especially if that environment has TP types, like they have to develop some TI, or they're just going to be like, they're just going to be hit from the side continuously, because the TI is like surprising the other people, the competition, whatever, is hitting them from these different directions that they weren't trained for. They haven't rehearsed. So I think there's some wonderful flexibility that can come up with it. There's also basic things like, like what is the balance between data and theory, and sort of being aware of what that is. and being a little bit more balanced. I think also INTJ and ISTJ, we don't like applying leverage in a situation to get something done for the purpose of power or influence, because it feels inauthentic and manipulative. It feels unethical. And yet I encounter TP types all the time that do stuff to apply leverage to get something done. And I'm not sure I really approve of it to be honest, but I do see the value of it. And at least I understand what I'm seeing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I notice INTJs and ISTJs can notice in a very detached way when things are contradicting or inconsistent. They just tend to not be, especially for the INTJ, as pedantic as, let's say, an INTP is about it. Because I think SI can add to a level of pedanticness and TI can add to a level of pedanticness. So INTPs have strong TI and they can be very, very, I keep just hammering home the word pedantic. Whereas
Yeah.
an INTJ may notice, oh, that doesn't make sense in what they say. Like, let's say an INTJ is skeptical of what you have to say because they know you're talking about a chemical, but you're not getting the chemical's name right or like the certain context right for that specific thing. But they're not gonna like beat you over the head with logic about it. They just know it's incorrect.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a great contrast between TE and TI. I was working with a ENTJ once. I mean, working with as in like a coaching thing. And he had written this article and he did a really great job of recruiting evidence in order to bolster his viewpoint. And he knew type, and I'm like, and he was asking, how can I make this better? And I'm like, as I'm reading this, I see not only no evidence of TI, but a lot of contradictory things in here that you're just pulling evidence from all different directions in order to support like actually an unconscious FI position. And that what I would really encourage him to do is to like locate what are some very broad general principles, and then to make sure the evidence that you bring in and the different arguments actually conform and are consistent to those principles. Unfortunately, he was not able to do that because I'm asking him to do his fifth function. And I think that's a whole other story. I think we can recognize when other people do the fifth function, but for us to do the fifth function ourselves is quite a challenge. But he did understand in type terms what I was saying. And I felt that was very much a contrast. And when I was younger, like at college age, I would have done the same as him. I'm going to recruit arguments in order to support my claim. And the arguments are going to be evidence here and evidence there with some like reasoning, A equals B, B equals C. And I'm like, that's actually like not really a great way of reasoning. It just really isn't. Unless TI is present, the reasoning is probably going to be bad. That said, something I'd like to say about all of the six function stuff is it is possible for a person, because the six function is used in the context of the whole personality, it is possible for a person to be using their sixth function more effectively than somebody who has that as their dominant function in a specific circumstance. I have encountered INTPs and ISTPs, for example, where I'm listening and I'm like, yeah, your model is not good. And I could really name why and say, like, these are like, I see the approach that you're taking. So for example, somebody who like INTP who works is a personality psychologist. And I'm like, you're defining traits. First of all, you're defining personality as trait clusters. Is that really the accurate way to describe what personality is? Maybe personality is a pattern of mental processes. But he was so ingrained with this notion that it's pattern of trait clusters that which is statistically defined. And I'm like, but a human being is not that. A human being is a dynamic system. Dynamic systems have metabolism. We have processes. Therefore, deduction, we need to use models that actually speak in those terms. And in that moment, in that specific context, I'm like, wow, I have like better principles than you do. And TI is your dominant function. Like, what you doing? Catch up. And you're older than me too. So like, no excuse. But we can become just like, and I can become stuck with tunnel vision with something that is a vision which is not realistic at all, might even be quite destructive, and somebody else who has TI as 6 that actually has a healthier, more mature version. They don't use it as much, but in the domain, they really do have a better version. So I think that maturity of the function is not the same thing as the amount of use.
Agreed. And so I'm curious about INFJ and ISFJ. Can you tell me a bit about their 6 slot introverted feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. Last but not least, INFJ and ISFJ, staying true to who you really are, and adhering to these personal beliefs about what's important. And I find it so funny when I hear, especially because INFJ will sort of take a meta position with respect to their own personality when the subject comes up, and they can say things like, "Yeah, I don't really pay attention to how I feel about such and such." Like, they're more focused on what other people feel about it and therefore what they're supposed to feel in response. And I remember this moment with brain imaging with an INFJ, and I asked him this. We were doing a task, which I don't normally do now, but is one on like talking about 2 or 3 people that you really value and respect, and what is it that you value and respect about them. So he answers the question, and as I'm looking at it, I'm seeing he's only using his left prefrontal cortex, and he's not actually using the region of the brain, the right frontal area here, the temple area that is involved with like and dislike and that kind of thing. And so I noticed this, and I'm like, is that your honest answer about how you feel? And immediately he understood the question, and he's like, no, it absolutely is not. Like, he named some people and very positive things about them, and it all sounded great. And he's like, actually, I just lied about everything. He's like, I don't actually feel that way about them when you bring it up. I know I'm supposed to feel that way. Damn, like that's a burden, so to hear from an ISFJ or INFJ, when you ask them, how do you feel about it? And are you acting on what's important for you? If they can answer that in a positive way, I think that's amazing. Then it's really showing that there's this alignment of like purpose and intention within themselves that they're connected with.
Yeah, I could definitely see this. And I find that some INFJs and ISFJs have a well-developed sense of morality. And so you can see almost a analysis, like using the introverted thinking and the introverted feeling in a symbiosis in a way where they're detached and detached in some instances and trying to understand like the principles behind like if something makes sense morally or not, especially like from the INFJ's philosophical angle of understanding it, and then building parts of their worldview off of that in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for an ISFJ, they can start to, if they develop the 6th function, have some sort of moral desire to want to, like it's a moral desire of other people, like and like maybe it's combined with the auxiliary extroverted feeling in both the INFJ and ISFJ, where they can have a sense of morality about the group
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that it's considering other people's feelings. It's like from permission with the NISI and FE, they're able to develop these FI ethical values.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. I even know INFJ in the type community, and it really is. I mean, over the course of many years, I don't know her that well, but it really is interesting through the development and her fascination with TI mental model, which is type, and then all the stuff that comes with it, like becoming a coach and a counselor and these kinds of things. And then from that, being aware of what are the ethical principles of type. And then that becomes incorporated. It's like, well, what is my purpose? Why am I doing this? Why is this important to me? Like, she can say all of that now, whereas years ago that would not have been the case. Which reminds me, by the way, a great, like, one of the TI answers that I learned, speaking of TI FI together, the TI answers I learned about what are the applications of type. The applications of type are the ethical uses of type. if you're not doing one of the things that's the ethical uses of type, you're not doing. I mean, you're using type, but if you want to know what are the applications, they are the ethical applications. And that to me brings in like the FI and TI together for me at the same time.
Mm. Well said. And so thank you so much, Dario, for coming out today and sharing your wisdom of the sixth function. And so if you liked what you learned here, feel free to check out his book, The Magic Diamond. He actually mentions the sixth function in that book. And also, if you can, feel free to check out the workshop that he's holding in October in Arizona. It's in person, and I will be there, and he is there.
Ooh.
And it's going to be a fun time where it's about type, self-actualization. Yeah, if you like growing as a person, if you like doing that in a fun atmosphere, well, check out the event. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to learn in flesh and blood from Dario, and I'll be the special guest there too.
Woo.
So,
Yes.
woo! All right, and so thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you all in the next one.
Thank you.